Hello and welcome to Biology Career Insights, the podcast where we talk with experts from the field of biology to gain valuable insights into the careers and explore ways to navigate the job market in this ever-evolving field. I'm your host, Dr. Manish Kumar. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Sebastian A. Brunemeier. Sebastian is a biotech VC and company builder focused on longevity and regenerative medicine. He's the co-founder and general partner of Healthspan Capital and CEO and founder of ImmuneAGE Pharma, focused on immune system rejuvenation. Over the past 5 years, he has co-founded 4 longevity biotech companies with a total equity value of more than $700 million. He was the co-founder and chief investment officer at Cambrian Biopharma, co-founder and CEO of Samsara Therapeutics, and principal at Apollo Health Ventures. Altogether, these organizations have raised more or less $400 million in last 4 years. He was a Fulbright Fellow on the Biology of Aging at Skaggs Oxford Scholar at the Scripps Research Institute and a Sense Foundation Scholar at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. His education includes partial PhD training in biochemistry of aging at the University of Oxford, as a Clarendon Scholar, a Master's in Life Sciences Business Management and Molecular Neuroscience from the University of Amsterdam, as an Amsterdam Excellence Scholar. He served as a trustee of the British Society for Research on Aging, a mentor at the New York Academy of Sciences, and as an advisor and board member to MoleculeAGE, Equator Therapeutics, Revivo Therapeutics, Shift Biosciences, Deciduous Therapeutics, and McKinsey & Company. Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you, Manish, for the invitation.
Amazing. So let's dive in straight away. What was your inspiration to pursue career in science and then be an entrepreneur, and how did you get started in the field?
Sure. It was pretty easy to choose science. Science is the discipline to which we owe most of the advances in modern society. I'd always been interested in it as a kid growing up. I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor, but I grew up in the United States, and the U.S. medical system is not very efficient, and it's not a lot of fun to be a doctor in the U.S. because you can't really get to know your patients, and a lot of the medicine doesn't work very well, and so on. So I became really interested in the molecular biology of disease and aging, worked in some research labs and institutes. And at some point, I came across the work of Aubrey de Grey, gentleman with the long beard, who is one of the real pioneers and visionaries in this field of LongBio, longevity biotech. And so, he ended up giving me a research fellowship at the Buck Institute, funded by Peter Thiel's capital at the time, prominent venture investor. And from there, I was really hooked. And I could not imagine doing anything other than LongBio for the rest of my career. And to this day, it's hard for me to imagine something with more potential impact than slowing the aging process and thereby treating many different age-related diseases at once, because I'm a believer in dealing with the root cause of a problem rather than just sort of patching it over with temporary solutions. And that's what a lot of medicine does today. It's sick care, not healthcare. So yeah, and I can tell you more about the details if you're curious.
Yes, so I'm curious, so although I mentioned about your education and stuff, when was, so tell us your journey from the beginning as a child, like, were you clear on being a doctor as a child, or what made you pursue, say, science in your college?
Yeah, it was always just the topic that I was most interested in. So when I was like a, young kid, 5-something years old, my favorite book to read was this kid's book for physiology that my mom would read me. So yeah, I was always interested in medicine. When I was young, I had some medical problems, and so I was exposed to the medical system. That probably contributed. Some of my relatives are doctors or nurses, and so yeah, I was sort of relevant. But I really came to that conclusion in most decisions I make through what I hope is a relatively rational process of realizing that if you don't have your health, you have nothing. So many people are out there in the world just trying to make money, and that's fine. You need a certain amount of money, probably not as much as most people think, to be happy. But you really have nothing if you don't have your health.
Absolutely.
And so how many billionaires, suffered for many years at the end of their lives in poor health, or poor mental health, physical health and mental health. So I've really tried to prioritize physical and mental health, and I do yoga and I try to eat well and take care of myself. But no matter how perfect or ascetic your diet and lifestyle may be, and whatever the perfect diet and lifestyle proves to be for humans, I think the jury's still out. No matter what you do, maybe you can slow the pace of aging by 1/3 or something like that through diet and lifestyle. But really, to achieve those radical lifespan extension potential, we need strategies for engineered negligible senescence, as Aubrey calls them. We need to address this damage that causes aging. And there's been a revolution in the last roughly 20 years in the field of geroscience, the biology of aging, where we know what are the molecular and cellular drivers of the aging process. We can extend the healthy lifespan of mice by up to about 30% with no negative side effects through many different interventions, maybe a couple dozen interventions that we can combine for synergy. So that's really what I'm keen on. It is these more radical, almost science fiction today, but science reality in the near future, interventions to slow aging. So these can be gene therapy, cell therapy, some of these geroprotective drugs. And as we gain the ability to rewrite the genetic code with tools like CRISPR and newer tools, the sky is the limit. So I think we're going to enter the golden age for longevity biotech and biotech broadly. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said, the greatest advances of this century will be at the interface of technology and biology, and that's biotech. Craig Venter, one of the leading genomics pioneers, said something similar, which is, last century was a century of physics and chemistry. This is the century of biology. And George Church, the great Harvard professor of genetics, is very keen on longevity and synthetic biology, believes the same. So yeah, I think those of us in the biology field are fortunate because we're well positioned to be at what I think will be the most important industry of this century.
Amazing, amazing. That's really inspiring. And Sebastian, was it during your PhD that you encountered and felt in love with the longevity field? Or you said you got a scholarship to the Buck Institute of Aging. When was that? It was during your PhD or during your master's?
Yeah, it was even before that. It was right after undergrad. So I read Aubrey's book in high school. I thought about it and, started to get interested in sirtuins, worked on sirtuins as an undergrad, and David Sinclair's work, Lenny Garrente, and that field. Mm-hmm. Then I did my undergrad thesis at Mount Sinai School of Medicine on brain aging and Alzheimer's. And then I did this fellowship at the Buck Institute. And, I was pretty keen on longevity before that, but I wasn't sure that I was going to commit my career to it. And then I did a Fulbright in telomere biology. And so really I just kept, working on aging because it was so interesting. And then at some point I basically said to myself, probably when I was doing my master's, this is it for me. Like I'm like a stem cell that has differentiated down its path of differentiation to the point where there's no going back. I'm not going to do something else at this point. So yeah.
And when was, because I think quitting a PhD midway is not easy for many, I think most of the PhDs, we agree that, there was a survey which was stating that it is close to, if I'm not wrong, close to 60-70% PhDs have thought of quitting their PhD once during their tenure because of several things, because you have your own highs and lows, But when was that point for you, that you decided you'll quit your PhD and, start a journey as an entrepreneur?
Sure. They say that if you haven't thought about quitting your PhD, you're not doing it right. I got lucky because I never really seriously considered quitting the PhD. I really enjoyed it. I like Oxford. I like my advisor. Everything was good. I was very lucky. That said, while I was doing the PhD, I was working part-time at a company that I had founded, working with Apollo Ventures called Samsara Therapeutics,
Mhm.
which is today the largest or one of the largest autophagy-focused drug discovery platform companies in Oxford, UK. And so I was busy with that as well. And then a colleague that I worked with at Apollo invited me to co-found what was going to be a fund with him. It later became Cambrian Biopharma. And so I basically said, well, okay, let's put the PhD on pause. Let's attempt to launch this company. We'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work after a year or two, that's fine. Oxford has been here for almost 1,000 years. It's not going anywhere. I'll just come back and finish. That ended up going fairly well. And then, I decided it doesn't make sense for me to spend my time and energy on the PhD because, as a single PhD in the lab, I can only make so much progress. But I had, prior expertise in biotech management, venture capital. And so, I figured that I enjoy that more and it's just a better use of my talents to focus on building and investing in new companies. So yeah. And then uh, haven't looked back since.
Amazing, amazing. So, Sebastian, most of us, and I think, I'll also kind of ask on my own behalf because most of the PhDs, they lack this business background, and for me, my first job, like in consulting, was like a business school for me. And for you as a student, like, I think you already got a business degree before entering your PhD, or
Yeah.
you had a business degree before.
Mm.
And that's how, like, when you entered your PhD, then you founded Samsara in parallel. Or was that during your PhD you discovered something that led you to found that company?
Yeah. I founded Samsara while I was working at Apollo between my master's and starting the PhD. And then I continued to basically build out the team and operate the company as COO, Samsara, during the first year of the PhD. So then I recruited in a rockstar team who has continued to advance the company. Something I would say to those who are interested in entrepreneurship, um, the credentials, doing a PhD or master's or whatever training is helpful, but sometimes it doesn't make sense for everybody. So if you happen to be the type of person who, doesn't have the patience to do a PhD or you don't have the opportunity or whatever, you don't, you shouldn't assume that you need to have that degree or that credential in order to launch a company or join a company. If you're just capable, conscientious, and you can learn on your own relatively well, then there are many companies out there that would like to hire you or work with you. Credentials, they make a lot of sense, but I would not give up on a career in biotech if for whatever reason you don't have the opportunity to spend 5 years or 6 years doing a PhD. It takes a lot of time, and PhDs, they make a lot of sense if you want to do academia, but for biotech, they're not entirely necessary.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, and Sebastian, one of the questions that I think most people aspiring to be entrepreneurs face or raise, they also kind of ping me, is the investment. I know there are many venture capitalists or there are like so many investment funds trying to, kind of help entrepreneurs. But it is still not easy for the biotech entrepreneurs, so to say, to get their first funding. So how did you raise your first, so to say, your funds, and what would be your advice to, other aspiring entrepreneurs?
Sure. So what I did was quite helpful, which is I started with a larger fund that already existed, Apollo Health Ventures,
Mhm.
which is today the largest aging-focused fund in the world, based in Germany, colleagues in Boston, over 200 million under management. And that gave me the ability to raise capital a little bit more easily from the fund. This is sometimes called an entrepreneur in residence role,
Mhm.
sometimes scientist in residence, this kind of thing. that's a really good way to start if you haven't worked at a biotech company before, you haven't been C-suite in one of these companies. So become an EIR at an existing fund. That's a good way to go. Um, and, you want to build up your investor network as always. So, go to conferences, reach out to people who are interested in your specific niche area. But yeah, there's no easy way to do that. You just have to be out there and meet a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I mean, can you remember some interesting stories about the challenges that you faced during your, your first company? And then I will kind of come to, your current health company called Healthspan Capital, but perhaps some interesting stories or challenges that you faced during the company building process. The first one.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Um, with the first one, it was relatively straightforward. I mean, it's never easy to launch a company, but it was pretty obvious to me reading the literature that this process of autophagy, the cellular process of autophagy, was very important for aging. And yet, almost nobody had attempted to enhance this process of autophagy therapeutically. There were a handful of academic groups that had worked on it, but really no large-scale industry efforts. Many industry efforts to inhibit autophagy by big pharma in the context of cancer, because tumor cells rely on autophagy for their robustness and vitality. And so we could kind of flip the script and enhance autophagy. And autophagy, it is necessary for life extension from fasting. So many religions and practices all over the world and cultures advocate fasting. It's one of the best things you can do for your health. You have to be careful. It's if you do a long fast, it can be dangerous if you're not used to it, but incredible medical results with fasting. So it's often said, if we had a pill that would encapsulate some of the benefits of fasting or of exercise, it would be the best selling drug, most effective medicine of all time. And, we can get some of the way there with autophagy enhancement, autophagy enhancing small molecules. So Samsara, we set up this phenotypic screening pipeline platform to find these new mechanism of action enhancers of autophagy. One molecule that enhances autophagy is rapamycin, and that's the best known geroprotector. It works very well in many animal models of disease, FDA approved for some human diseases. But it's got some drawbacks. And so what if we could find a better version of rapamycin, a safer version? Rapamycin is pretty safe at a low dose, but no one had really tried this at industrial scale. So that's what Samsara is doing, putting our first drug in the clinic, hopefully this year. And we have a really excellent team managing the company. And so, some complexities of that process. You want to choose a jurisdiction to incorporate the company that is like relatively easy to work with and where investors want to invest. So even though the company operates in Oxford, UK, it's a Delaware incorporated entity. It's a US entity. And part of that, the reason for that is because the legal system in Delaware is very well understood by international investors, and some of our investors are American, just makes it easier. UK is not so bad as far as jurisdictions go. But if you're operating perhaps in Asia or in India or in many parts of Europe, Latin America, the legal system is not as clear. And so it's relatively easy to incorporate a company in Delaware or the UK or Switzerland or Singapore, these very well-established legal jurisdictions, and employ yourself no matter where you happen to live. So yeah, that's one consideration. Another thing is, we interacted with a number of different technology transfer offices, TTOs. Some of our academic founders work at these universities, and TTOs can really slow you down a lot because the incentives are not well aligned. And so that's something to really watch out for, is when you need to license IP or you need to work with a professor at a given university, you have to be really careful choosing, because their TTOs can really, really throw a wrench in the whole process. ultimately it worked out. But in some countries, like France, for example, it's not very straightforward dealing with academic industry collaboration. So those are two pitfalls or two, non-obvious things that you might want to think about launching a company.
Wow. And as you were mentioning, about rapamycin and stuff, I just remember that today I was sending an email to Pankaj Kapahi at Buckets. Perhaps you know him, because he's the one who's working on like the mTOR pathway and the rapamycin and stuff. So quite a coincidence there. As a follow-up question, tell us more about your current company, which is Healthspan Capital, and what does it do?
Sure, I think that's a logo right here. I'm in Montenegro right now, and it's a little bit chilly. So I'm wearing all this clothes, but yeah, there's a cool event in Montenegro, by the way, organized by Vitalik Buterin from Ethereum, and he's invited a bunch of longevity biotech and crypto and network state decentralized governance people. So if somebody who's listening to this happens to be in Europe and they want to come, reach out to me. So yeah, with Healthspan, we I'm proud to say in our first year of operations last year became the most active longevity biotech LongBio venture fund. So we did 15 deals. We've done 17 deals in total. And so, we basically saw a huge gap in the market. Me and my two partners and many of other colleagues who've joined, we saw a huge gap in the market for LongBio. So there are a fair amount of groups that are doing company building, new co-formation. Apollo does it quite well. Cambrian does it quite well. Juvenescence is another good example. There are a fair amount of these kinds of groups.
Yeah, there's one. So our previous, maybe Tobias, he's the CEO of Maximon. We just had a podcast with him. Yeah. So he was also, yeah. So Healthspan.
Exactly.
So Healthspan Capital is also a VC builder, like a company builder.
Yeah, we're actually distinct from them. So we're more like a traditional venture fund in that we provide capital to early stage companies and founders without needing to have a majority stake or to really have a hands-on role. I mean, we do try to provide a lot of hands-on support in terms of the board level or introductions or just strategic guidance, this kind of thing. But we don't take an operational role. And there's a huge gap in the market because there are very few, almost zero, traditionally structured venture funds catering to the LongBio space. And so, we have been able to invest in a lot of really high quality companies in a short period of time because we're pretty much the only game in town, one of the very few groups that's structured like a traditional venture fund in this space.
And you mentioned about, the difficulties of kind of having a legal entity in, say, Europe, for example, compared to Delaware or some, I don't know, maybe you can define them as more mature markets for, for startups. So US is more evolved in terms of what are the current challenges that you see in Europe and how can we overcome them?
Yeah, so in Europe, the science is really good, but the ability to spin out companies is more limited. So professors, postdocs, they're not quite as entrepreneurial in the United States. And there's really much, much less capital in Europe. So this is a problem we're trying to help solve. We're able to invest in Europe. We've invested in Europe and the UK. So yeah, that's really the main challenge in Europe is there's not that much entrepreneurial talent, although it's growing, and not that much startup capital. So I would advise a startup founder, if you are able to move to the United States, or at least establish an office in the United States for fundraising and set up as a Delaware C Corp, that is really a huge advantage. But things are improving in Europe. I mean, things are growing. Biotech is growing a lot. Switzerland is a good place for biotech. UK is a pretty good place as well. So yeah, Europe is improving, but as with everything, as with LongBio in general, we need more talent and we need more capital.
Wow. And as a part of, say, Healthspan Capital, you would be encountering numerous companies doing all wonderful things. So, what are the latest, say, trends and exciting developments in the longevity field right now? And what do you see? How do you see the future of longevity evolving?
Sure. We could do a whole podcast on this topic, but um, to abbreviate, to summarize, um, there are areas that have a lot of attention, a lot of excitement, and then there are areas that I think should have more attention, but don't, given their merit. And so, areas that are really hot right now and new developments. Um, so there's a lot of interest in epigenetic reprogramming. So Yamanaka reprogramming, it's sometimes called. This Nobel was awarded in 2012 to Shinya Yamanaka and
Well, IPS.
iPSC technology. Yeah, exactly. So Shinya Yamanaka in Japan, as well as in San Francisco at the Gladstone Institute, as well as John Gurdon in Cambridge. And basically what they showed was you could take a developed adult cell, like a skin cell, like a fibroblast, or whatever cell type you want, and you can treat it with 4, now you can get down to 3 transcription factors genes in a dish, and it will reset the epigenetic age to basically a day 0 embryonic-like stem cell. And it will also reset the identity, the cellular identity. So go from like a skin cell or a liver cell to kind of like an embryo type cell. And for aging, you actually don't want to reset the cell type. So you don't want your whole body to turn into an embryo. You want to preserve your cellular tissue identity. And so there have been advances in the last few years in transient epigenetic reprogramming, partial reprogramming, which resets the epigenetic age but retains cellular identity. Calico's done a lot of work on this. Alejandro Campo in Switzerland's done some of this, and a whole lot of others. So that has excited people a lot. And when I give public talks, I often lead with this sort of provocative statement, which is a biological immortality is already possible, and it's a solved problem, but at the level of cells, not yet at the level of whole organisms. And that was true even before Yamanaka reprogramming, because of the germline. So our reproductive cells, the sperm and egg and the stem cells that create them, they are technically immortal. So when you or I were created, we started from 2 cells, a sperm and egg cell, and those cells grew into the whole organism. And in us, some of those cells that derive from the embryo have been preserved to be embryonic-like germ cells that are the reproductive cells. And then when we, again, have children, the same process begins. And so there's an unbroken lineage all the way back to the dawn of life on this planet for cellular immortality. And so now it's really an engineering challenge of understanding the mechanisms that govern germline immortality and translating them into medicines that can traffic to enough cells in the body to mediate whole organismal epigenetic or otherwise rejuvenation. And Cynthia Kenyon, CSO at Calico, Google's multi-billion-dollar longevity company, she is working on this very topic within C. elegans, and has published on this in Nature. She's shown something quite interesting on the protein level, where when an egg is fertilized in the C. elegans, it turns over the whole proteome at that moment of conception, so to speak. And so there are other mysteries to unlock about germline immortality. So that's an area that I think is very attractive. But there's a caveat, which is there hasn't been much lifespan extension data with epigenetic reprogramming yet, though it's still early. And so there are other areas that I think have stronger evidence in terms of lifespan extension. And there are areas that will not be addressed by epigenetic reprogramming, even in its final perfect form, its platonic form. One of these areas is DNA repair. So somatic DNA repair. So we have hundreds of billions or trillions of cells in the body, and they're metabolizing and they're dividing and proliferating. And when they do that, it causes DNA damage. And the way they deal with that damage is they either repair it through these complex machinery, or they basically give up on life. And they will either go apoptosis, programmed cell death, orderly suicide, or they will go senescent and stop dividing. And that process accelerates aging. It's like a zombification process. And then they wait around to be eliminated by the immune system. We've invested in some companies working on all of those points. So we would like to prevent that bad stuff from happening in the first place. And so the best way to do that, the sort of root cause to ameliorate, would be one of the 4 primary hallmarks of aging: DNA repair, enhancing DNA repair fidelity. It's well known that supercentenarians, humans who live very long, healthy lives, many of them have gain-of-function mutations in DNA repair factors. And then conversely, pretty much all of the accelerated aging diseases called progerias that look like reverse Benjamin Button, they're very sad. Young children accelerate aging and die quite young. These are all mutations in DNA metabolism factors. So that's quite a clue. And then we further have evidence from people like Vera Gorbunova, a good friend of mine, who I did a podcast interviewing her recently, who's an advisor to Healthspan. She does comparative longevity research, and she and others have found that longer-lived species have much better DNA repair capacity. So in conclusion, there are all these lines of evidence. DNA repair fidelity is super important, and yet there's almost no industry efforts seeking to enhance the fidelity of DNA repair. And so, I and a group pitched the UK government's new ARIA program, their sort of DARPA-like moonshot organization, to work on this. And I'll try to tell everybody that I can to work on DNA repair enhancement. But there are many other areas like that that are underappreciated. And it's not because for any good reason, really. It's just because of fashion. That's the way science tends to go. As things become hot, everyone works on them. But we try to be contrarian, counter-cyclical type investors doing stuff that's not as obvious.
Wow. Senolytics, I understand the concept that you want to get rid of the senescent cells. But senescence has been, evolutionarily conserved across species because it has a very worthy function, and that is of suppressing cancer, right? It's a tumor suppressing mechanism. So how do you see senolytics in that context?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, and I worked on senescence a bit in my PhD. Senescence evolved for a very important purpose, as you point out, tumor suppression, just like telomeres in large part evolved for tumor suppression. And so the proposition is not to prevent senescence from occurring. The proposition is to eliminate these cells that have gone senescent. And when you have too many senescent cells accumulating with age, it causes accelerated aging in like a positive feedback loop. So just for context, cellular senescence is when a cell stops dividing, it exits the cell cycle, and it starts secreting a bunch of inflammatory factors, the SASP factors. And these, a lot of them are come eat me signals to the immune system. And it's also involved in tissue repair and some other processes. But generally speaking, as senescent cells accumulate with age, importantly because of immune system failure, which we're working on at ImmuneAGE Bio, it accelerates aging. And if you ablate senescent cells, it extends lifespan up to about 27%. And so I think it's a good idea to eliminate senescent cells. There have been a couple early efforts like from Unity Biotech that had some interesting targets. Didn't pan out initially. They may still pan out in the future. In biotech, it's rare that your first attempt succeeds. But senolytics broadly as a field make a lot of sense. I'm partial to leveraging the immune system to eliminate senescent cells as it eliminates cancer cells. Senescent cells and cancer cells are kind of similar in some ways.
Yes.
And so we've invested in, for example, deciduous therapeutics, which is developing an iNKT cell small molecule engager that activates a certain subtype of immune cells that naturally surveil for senescent cells and cancer cells. And they have achieved pretty impressive results. Another approach would be to rejuvenate the immune system like we're doing at ImmuneAGE, and that could prevent cellular senescence accumulation, but also many other problems that happen as our immune system fails. So you mentioned I'm coughing. You might notice I'm coughing. I've had a cold. And part of that is because I get more cold than I used to as a kid because my immune system is weakening with time. And we've seen this, for example, with COVID. The number one risk factor for COVID is biological age. And so we would like to be in a world where your risk of death from infectious disease does not skyrocket as a function of age. And also, it turns out the immune system does a lot of other cool things. It surveils for tumors. The reason you and I don't have cancer tumors in our bodies right now, hopefully knock on wood, is because our immune system is always surveilling for those nascent tumors and eliminating them. And that's one reason why aging is, or cancer is an age-related disease, in part because of thymic involution, as well as failure of the bone marrow. And so, one way we would propose to address senescence and many of these consequences of immune aging is what we're doing at ImmuneAGE. So what we do is, building on the work of academic rock stars in this field, we have a method of ex vivo expansion and rejuvenation of hematopoietic stem cells, T cells, and other immune cell types. So the long-term vision is we have patients or even well people who want to tune up their immune system, say after age 30 or 40 or something. Every several years, you go into this clinic, we mobilize some of your hematopoietic stem cells, your bone marrow stem cells into your blood, which is routinely done today in the bone marrow transplant field. Isolate them, expand them with our new method. We can achieve over 1,000-fold expansion, which is the world record by far. And then we rejuvenate them with our cocktails, and then we reinfuse them into the bloodstream. And the cool thing about HSCs is they home to the bone marrow, so they know where to go. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. There's also even a method, megakaryocyte extracellular vesicles are called, produced by megakaryocytes. They can deliver cargo selectively to HSCs. So we're looking into leveraging that in the near future. But in the meantime, there's very low-hanging fruit, which is just banking, preserving, rejuvenating HSCs. You can do some of that with cord blood. So if you have a child, you can preserve its cord blood. That's very helpful to them as individuals and maybe some relatives. But cord blood is really limited because you don't have very many cells in the cord blood and the expansion process doesn't work very well. Anyway, so we envision a day when everyone can tune up their immune system on a regular basis. Some of the molecules that we're rejuvenating ex vivo outside of the body, we can actually dose them orally or maybe as an injection. One of them we found, our collaborator, rejuvenates immune function better than anything that my team of immunologists have ever seen. And that one, thankfully, is orally available as a pill. So that's something where we could envision taking that, before cold and flu season to boost our defenses, or before receiving a vaccine in order to boost our immune response to it. And so, it's just amazed me that there's been so little activity in HSC and immune system rejuvenation. But I think it's because there were a couple missing pieces on the technological side, including the expansion and the understanding that we now have of the biology of aging. So happy to elaborate on that.
Brilliant. No, so I kind of, I'll also, kill my own curiosity, because I was like, listening to another aging podcast by Sinclair, and he was, promoting, say, this is more towards the diet stuff. And he was mentioning that eating, say, stressed plants, because, these stressed plants actually secrete the longevity factors, because all these longevity genes express certain, cytokines or, other secretory factors, which will be beneficial for, consumers or like the person who eat. So what is your opinion on that? Is it like trying to open a new business area, or is it really the science of it has a lot of data, which supports this? What's your opinion?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So, I think Sinclair has a good point here, and there have been many who have argued for this theory of hormesis, where a little bit of a toxin is good for you, a little bit of stress is good for you. It's certainly true with exercise, cold shock, heat shock, this kind of thing. And that's true with plant secondary metabolites. Resveratrol is one example. It's a mild toxin, may work through that mechanism. Metformin is another example. I think metformin is a little overrated in the longevity space, but still probably makes sense for many people to take. Anyway, so you can only get so far with hormesis and small molecules. And so we are really interested in this new unfolding revolution in gene and cell therapy. So I'll be a little provocative and say, in 20 years, 30 years, we're really going to be popping very few pills. We are going to be getting gene and cell therapies. Just like how starting in the 80s and 90s with Genentech and the biotech revolution, it sort of overturned the traditional pharma approach. Today, 30 years after, biologic drugs from the biotech sector are the best-selling drugs and often the most effective drugs. Monoclonal antibodies, peptides, proteins, etc. And the funny thing is, David Baltimore, who is the president of Caltech, Nobel laureate in immunology, legend in the field, he said that regarding the biotech revolution of the 90s, Big Pharma was, quote, asleep at the wheel, unable to understand the profound advances of molecular biology. And that allowed companies like Genentech, Biogen, Celgene, Hybridtech, these kind of companies to really grow, and then they were acquired or merged, many of them. So I predict something similar is going to happen with gene and cell therapy, and also with the longevity field. So in maybe 40 years, or hopefully sooner, there will be no such thing as longevity biotech, LongBio field, and a traditional pharma field. There will only be longevity. There will be exceptions like rare diseases or maybe anti-infectives, stuff that really is not an age-related disease, but like my friend Aubrey de Grey says, we will bring aging under medical control. We won't have probably cured aging completely, but we will have severely mitigated it. And the historical analogy that I often give is the dawn of antibiotics in the turn of the 20th century. So, in the 1850s, the pharmaceutical industry really started in the chemical dyes industry in Germany. They created the sulfanilamide class of antibiotics. In the early 20th century, penicillin, most famous antibiotic, was really advanced at my college at Oxford, Lincoln College, no big deal, by Howard Florey and colleagues who shared the Nobel Prize. And around that time, most people died from infectious disease. And so if you were to approach a doctor or a general population member and say, hey, you know that thing that most people are dying from today, infection? Well, in 20, 30 years, almost nobody's going to die from that. They're going to be dying from something else much later, cardiovascular disease, cancer, that kind of thing, or war, or death by the hands of their own government in 20th century, after all. So I think this century, we will be able to achieve something similar with aging. It is the case that people still die of infectious disease, sadly, all over the world far too often because it's neglected by Big Pharma. But even in the West, people still die from infectious disease. So I think in 50 years, people probably will still die from aging, but it will be much later than we currently do. I think as we gain the ability to rewrite the genetic code, to grow whole organs and tissues, to supplement stem cells like HSCs, we could easily see lifespans of 150, 200, starting this century.
Wow. That makes us all very hopeful. And Sebastian, like you seem to be an aging enthusiast for sure. So do you kind of, do you recommend, or first of all, let me ask you, do you take some supplements or do you do some kind of healthy aging practices that you can recommend us or, safely?
Sure. I try to eat kind of a healthy diet. What that is for me is a low carb, sort of paleo style diet. I try to avoid processed food. All the basic stuff. Try to get a lot of sleep. Um, I do yoga pretty often. That helps me a lot. Tai Chi, Qigong, stuff like that. Really has a well established lineage in longevity. Ayurveda, the Indian system of medicine, has a whole subdiscipline, Rasayana, for longevity.
Precisely.
Yeah, I take
I will talk
supplement.
about this, I mean, off the record, I will be talking about this Rasayana thing, but
Sure.
yeah, go on, go on.
Yeah, so I try to do that kind of healthy stuff. Um, a friend of mine, Brian Johnson, does this blueprint, which is a very disciplined protocol. He looks amazing. It is reversed a lot of aging. And so, I try to emulate a little bit of that. But again, you can only get so far. And so we really need to double down on these hardcore, radical medical engineering approaches. Um, and so yeah, I would recommend to, do uh, the best you can for your health today and try to live as long as you can to stick around and to slow aging in order to be around, to be there for when these new interventions are available, because it's much easier to slow aging than to reverse it. So,
Wow. And any supplements that you take? Because I see a lot of people taking, say, NMN or, other supplements. So do you take any supplements or do you do fasting, for example?
yeah, I do intermittent fasting. I take a lot of supplements. You know, the jury is out on a lot of these, but they're pretty safe and relatively cheap, so it makes sense to take them. Uh, so yeah, but again, that's just sort of um, polishing, uh, improving, perfecting the fundamentals, diet, lifestyle, sleep, stress, all of those core pillars. Um, yeah, but I'm optimistic about the supplements that we have coming down the pipeline. There are a bunch of cool ones that I'm a fan of.
And did you undergo a genetic test before kind of, narrowing down to your supplement list or just it's a safe recommendation that anyone can take? What's your advice on that?
Yeah, so I've done a whole genome sequence. I got a couple interesting pieces of information, like high risk of macular degeneration, for example. But not a lot of it is super actionable right now. There's some stuff like the MTHFR gene for methylation that you can do something about, but at present, we just don't really know enough about the genome to really inform medical decisions very rigorously. But for most people, many of these supplements, diet and lifestyle changes are uh, probably going to be beneficial no matter what your genome sequence.
Wow. So Sebastian, now the most important question about what advice would you give to biology students who are considering a career in biotech entrepreneurship? And what are some of the most important things they should keep in mind as they pursue this path?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can definitely say I'm happy doing biotech entrepreneurship. It's not always easy, but it is meaningful. So people say, like having children, if you actually measure their happiness, it declines when you have children, but they all usually say it's the most meaningful thing that they have done in their lives or among the most meaningful. So I think the timing is pretty good to be in biotech. Like I mentioned, this hopefully will be the century of biotech. And so learning really strong fundamentals, molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry, all of that is essential. And then learn a bit of the business, the venture capital side, financials, venture law, all of that. Um, and no matter where in the world you are, there's a growing biotech scene. So, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was pretty much just in the United States, mostly California and Boston. But now biotech's really a global sort of revolution. And so no matter where you are, whether you're in India or China or Southeast Asia, Latin America, there won't be many biotech companies, maybe, but there will be some. And you just need to find the one that you're most excited about and join. Because school is cool, but it is costly in terms of time. And throughout history, humans, we mostly learned by doing. So learn on the job through apprenticeships, that kind of thing. The modern university is a pretty new invention. So I would recommend, get a strong foundation in academia, but then jump into the space. Yeah, and, biotech, it's one of the hottest areas. Today, we talk about these big tech companies, these tech behemoths, Google and Apple and Facebook and Amazon, these things. But I think in 20 or 30 years, we will be talking about biotech companies being, the giants striding the earth, maybe not in terms of scale of market, but certainly in terms of profitability and certainly in terms of impacting the human condition for the better. So, yeah, I would definitely advise anyone who's really interested in biotech to just jump right in.
Amazing. And for the more mature, say, entrepreneurs who already want to take a leap, say, in the longevity field, say, as an investor, as a venture capitalist, what are the key criteria that you evaluate the incoming ideas on? Or is there any specific advice that you give on this, like how to approach you, or how can they reach you, or how should they make their pitch deck look more attractive to you? So what are the criterias for you to evaluate, a particular idea?
Sure, I'll take that in a couple parts. So firstly, if you have a background in this space or any space really, you can apply to get involved through the LBF, LongBio Fellowship, Longevity Biotech Fellowship, co-founded by my colleague Nathan Chang, as well as a couple of other team members. And that will integrate you into the space. So you are part of a cohort a couple times a year. You hear from leaders in the space, and you can meet co-founders and companies hiring. I've hired several people recently through the LBF network. So apply to that. As far as how to make an attractive pitch, the details of making a pitch deck are kind of more of an art than a science. But spend the money for a professional graphic designer and keep it pretty simple if possible. Don't overwhelm with technical detail in your introductory deck. And try to do something that's really different from what everyone else is doing. So at least that's the kind of investments that we look for. There are investors who are looking for kind of Me Too products, maybe perceived lower risk, generic drug repurposing type stuff, or just Me Too type drugs. But generally, there's a sort of saying, there's a belief where it's easier to rally people, whether they're investors or colleagues and team members, around an audacious, ambitious goal than a simple goal. So for example, if you try to raise money and hire team members to make a new social media app or e-commerce solution or something, or another way to sell advertisements, you're not going to get the absolute rock stars. But if you say, like Elon Musk, let's revolutionize automobiles and make electric cars cool, or let's go to Mars, which I think is actually not really the best use of our time and capital, but it's the kind of thing that will galvanize people. And so you should have an audacious, ambitious, but reasonably achievable goal that's technologically achievable today. And if it's not technologically, scientifically achievable yet, that's what academia is for. And so moving into biotech, it's not for everybody. Some people really love asking those fundamental questions. But biotech is not really suited to do basic research because we have shorter timelines, 5 to 10 year time horizons. And so it has to be something that's going to produce a product in the near term. So those would be some initial considerations. And, get to know some people who've done it before. You can reach out cold to people and, share the deck and, oftentimes they will give you advice. As for getting in touch with me, you can send me a message on LinkedIn, share your deck, or whatever your ask is. And I sometimes get buried in messages, but periodically I'll go back and review them. So even if it takes me a while to respond, I will eventually get to your message.
Amazing, amazing. And Sebastian, finally, tell us tell us all, our audience, me, about your hobbies. What do you do when you're free? Because I see you're
Sure.
quite a busy person. You live in Puerto Rico, and then you kind of travel across the world. How's your time look like?
Yeah. I over the years I haven't made that much free time. Like I work a lot, but you have to recharge your batteries too. And so I try to regularly go to yoga classes, do exercise, hang out with friends, travel a fair amount. I travel a lot for work, and so that's kind of nice to see new places too. Um, yeah, I read a lot. I listen to audiobooks a lot. So I don't have too much time for extensive hobbies, but yeah, those are the main ones. Sometimes do martial arts, things like that. My hobbies have to be like a lot of like physical exercise oriented, just because I'm sitting at the desk so often. But yeah, those are some hobbies that I enjoy.
Amazing. So, Sebastian, thank you so much for your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Manish. Keep up the great work on your podcast, and thanks for the invitation.
Amazing. And to the audience, thank you for tuning to Biology Career Insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get the latest episodes delivered straight to your device. See you next time. Bye.